Wonderful. Well, for everyone who is joining us on Facebook Live, we are going to run through our presentation again. We still unfortunately got some technical difficulties, so TARC Executive Director Carrie Butler is not going to be able to join us, at least on the front end of this second presentation. She'll be able to join just to say a few words at the end. I will kick us off here. I'm Alex Bazorski. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications here at TARC. And we're just doing a public meeting today for the capital program of projects with federal funding from fiscal year 2023, walking through a little bit of background on federal funding and then going into our specific proposal for how those funds will be used. We are joined, our featured speaker is our Director of Capital and Grants, Jeffrey Hoban, who will walk us through all of these areas. We will have a little bit of time for questions after Jeffrey's presentation. For anyone who is on Facebook Live, you can enter those questions into the comments. For anybody who is joining us here on Zoom, you can enter those questions into the chat box, the chat and the Q&A box, and we will relay those to Jeffrey. If we have a bunch of questions, we'll get through as many as we can before 6 o'clock. If there are any questions that we can't get to or that we may not know the answer to tonight, we'll take down contact information and we will do our best to get back to you very promptly with those questions. So with that, Jeffrey, I will turn it over to you. It looks like we have your PowerPoint shared over here. So take it away. Let us know when to change slides.
Okay, very good. You can start right now if you can hear me, Sarah. Go to the next slide, that is. Great. Okay, just a brief overview of the agenda. I'm going to speak a little bit more succinctly than I did a bit ago about federal funding for transit. And then we'll discuss our current allocations for this federal fiscal year, as Alex mentioned, and the projects in the budget. And then we'll do Q&A. Go ahead, Sarah. Next slide. There you go. Okay. So more succinctly, in addition to what you see there, I just want to give you a little bit of history on transit funding from the federal government. Specifically, it's based in a 1982 law called the Surface Transportation Assistance Act, which allocated 1 cent of 5 cents in increase in the gas tax. So in 1982, when the gas tax was increased 5 cents per gallon, 1 cent of that went to the transit portion of the Highway Trust Fund. And from that 1 cent of gas taxes, transit across the country has been funded by the federal government to the degree that it is funded by the federal government ever since. Since then, every 6 years, the US Congress enacts authorizing legislation for transportation. Authorizing means they set limits on the amount of funding. They identify an amount of funding for the entire 6 years of the authorizing act and estimated amounts for each year. They may add a program or delete a program that has been funded in the past, depending on all of the things you might assume, input from constituents, lobbying, etc. Beyond that, or with that authorizing legislation in place, every year, as part of the budgeting process, the US Congress appropriates funds. They pass appropriation legislation that funds all of the transportation programs for the entire country from a federal perspective. And once they have done that, and that legislation has been signed into law by the president, then the various offices of the U.S. Department of Transportation, such as the Federal Highway Administration, the Federal Aviation Administration, and the Federal Transit Administration, they have the responsibility to allocate the funds appropriated for that year to each and every one of their designated recipients. In the case of the FTA, the Federal Transit Administration, that is states, and designated recipients that are in urbanized areas, typically over 200,000. And when I said designated recipients, I'm referring to urbanized areas, cities within those states, and sometimes not cities, but regions that have been designated by their governors for the receipt of those funds directly. Once what am I trying to say? In the FTA's case, those allocations typically occur, and in fact, they set their own guidance for them to occur within 60 days of the appropriation. So Congress has this authorizing legislation. Currently, it's called the bill, that was the secondary name. Actually, the first name was the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act. And then it was referred to as the bipartisan infrastructure legislation, or bill. With that act in place, they appropriated funds last year. They've appropriated funds this year, and the various agencies, administrations like the FTA have allocated funds. They announced those allocations, and this year, I think it was in February, and we'll go to the next slide. And you'll see how much they allocated to TARC in two categories, both of which are, you can see they're allocated by formula. This does not represent all of the funds that are appropriated, formula grants. There are also discretionary grants that are set aside that are competitive and that agencies apply for. But in our case, we're just talking about formula funds. So there's these two sections, section 5307, which is formula funding to urbanized areas. In our case, an urbanized area between 200,000 in population and under 1 million in population. And then there's 5339 funding, which is funding specifically for buses and bus facilities. It's also a formula program. It's much smaller, obviously, as you can see there. The one characteristic about 5307 funding that I want to point out very quickly is that there are two ways that you can use that funding that are not capital in the sense of buying or fixing things. Sorry, let me restate that. That are not in the typical capital sense of buying or replacing or rehabilitating things. In transit's case, buses, support vehicles. In highways cases, it's roads, bridges, whatnot. With that 5307 funding, we can also pay for the maintenance, the labor and the parts to fix our buses, the parts and the labor to fix our facilities. We can also use a portion of that funding to support the capital cost of the service we provide to our paratransit customers, which is contracted service. Okay, Sarah, if you would go ahead to the next slide. We'll show folks the breakdown. What you see here again on the first line and down below that, the lines that are section 5307 apportionment for 2023, that's A, and the section 5339 apportionment for 2023, that's B. You see those same two amounts that you saw on the previous slide. Below A, that $19.7 million, you see the two amounts that our subrecipient, the city of LaGrange, can expend from the amount, the total amount, that 19.7 million that is allocated to the Louisville urbanized area as a whole. LaGrange is a subrecipient because after the 2010 biennial census, they were made part of the urbanized area. Interestingly enough, with the 2020 census, they are no longer a part of the urbanized area. So next year, they will no longer be a subrecipient of TARC for those funds. But there you see the amount that they receive from the federal government through TARC for their use. Below the portion available to TARC, you see our local match. The federal government will only provide, by law, up to 80% of the funding needed for these capital purposes. That means that agencies that receive that federal funding are required to provide a local match of 20%. And in our case, that local match comes from the Mass Transit Trust Fund. If anybody isn't familiar with what that is, we can talk about it in Q&A. And you see the amount to match that $19.6 million is almost $5 million from local funds. Then you see the total amount combining that 19.6 and that 4.9 million available in 5307, in the 5307 program. Below that, you see the apportionment for bus and bus facilities funds, 5339 funds. You see the local match for it, and then you see the total program dollars available in that category. Finally, you see those apportionments available to TARC for 5307 and 5339 combined, and then the total local match against those two things, and then the total program beneath that. And with that, we'll go to the next slide. And here you see the breakdown of how we intend to utilize this funding. This you could think of this as you got an inheritance of $10,000 from your Uncle Harry, and you came up with a list of things you needed to do that were buying things or replacing things. And one of them is a new car, and one of them is a new piece of furniture for one room in your house, and another is maybe a piece of maybe a new printer or a new laptop or something like that. In the same sense, TARC tells the Federal Transit Administration, here's how we intend to spend this money. And they look at this list and all of our explanation behind it, and they say, okay, or they say, I need some more information about what X, Y, or Z part of our funding. And in this particular case, so you see, we have allocated $7.75 million to the purchase of replacement buses. The buses that money will replace have been in service for 15, or will have been in service by the time the new buses arrive, for 15 years, which is what the useful life that TARC expects from one of these very substantial buses that we purchase. Below that, you'll see A&E services. That's architectural and engineering services for facilities that need to be rehabilitated or renovated. Sometimes it's new facilities. We have a very long list of projects in that category. Below that, you see hardware and software costs. MIS is management information systems. And those costs that you see there are a portion of what we're going to need this coming year, actually, to replace, first and foremost, the system that is central to our operations. It's called computer-aided dispatching and automatic vehicle location, and it's how we communicate schedule information and all sorts of other information to our drivers out on the road. And it also provides the real-time information we can make available through apps or through websites about where our buses are and when they'll next arrive, including the signs at shelters on Dixie Highway and along the Route 10 line roadways. Below that, you see security enhancements. That can be anything from cameras at TARC's facilities or on our buses and the DVRs to record what the cameras see, to our ability to limit access to rooms and gates or through gates with IDs, to security fencing, gates, and other things that might be needed for security. That's a requirement, by the way. We have to spend that money every year. 1% of the total amount that the federal government makes available from 5307 funds has to be spent on security enhancements, it's referred to. Below that, you see a significant amount of money for renovation and rehabilitation of TARC facilities. As an example, TARC's primary facilities at Union Station were built in 1979 and 80. And they have not been renovated or rehabilitated since then. So you can perhaps imagine the amount of work that needs to be done. This is just a chunk of change that will go a very minor distance to filling all of those needs. Beyond that, you'll see that the maintenance that I mentioned a little while ago, that we can capitalize, we can use these federal funds toward supporting, and the portion of capital non-fixed route or ADA paratransit service that we provide, ADA being the Americans with Disabilities Act. Below that, you see capital cost of contracting. Fixed route, that's one route that serves and has served for something like 25 years now, the Bluegrass Industrial Park. That's operated by our contractor, hence capital cost of contracting. And then you see the assistance that is sub-allocated or that we pass through essentially to the city of LaGrange. Below that, you see the three items we've listed that we will use the Section 5339 bus and bus facility funds that were allocated to us this year for. One is for, again, for bus replacement. One is to acquire shop equipment, which can be anything from a forklift to a lift for buses, for mechanics to work underneath the bus, to tools, essentially, and support vehicles, supervisory vehicles, service trucks, things like that. Finally, at long last, the bottom there, you see enhanced mobility, section 5310, another section of US code that refers to a program that is intended to serve seniors and folks with disabilities, but not by public transit agencies, by private and public nonprofit human service agencies primarily. We were made the designated recipient for that program some 10 years ago or thereabouts, which means we don't get to spend the money the way we choose. It means the governors of both our states, Kentucky and Indiana, said, we want you to manage these funds and oversee their application to human service organizations primarily. So every year we have an application process, and our board awards funds based on that application process to a variety of human service organizations in the area that then use the funds to buy replacement vehicles to serve their populations. Okay. That said, how about we go to Q&A, and if we have any questions, I'll be happy to try and address them.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. We are checking right now. It does not look like we have any questions from Zoom. I'm looking over to see if we have questions from Facebook Live. It does not look like we do at the moment. So what I will say is that we have a couple more minutes before the top of the hour. So we will sit tight for a little bit. If anybody out there on Facebook Live or joining us on Zoom does have any questions that come up, we'll leave this slide up there that shows, again, the specific capital projects that we're proposing to be doing with the federal fiscal year 23 formula funding that Jeffrey had just gone through. So if you have any questions about this, if you have any questions about the overall funding process, please, good time to ask right now. Also, if you have any questions at all, just in general, we're always more than happy to take those. You can find a comment form on our website. You can also find our phone number. And would somebody remind me, our primary info email address is info@ridetarc.org, and we'll definitely be happy to take any questions that might come up later. Cool. With that, we will hang tight for just a little bit longer. Jeffrey, if you don't mind staying close in case we do have any questions coming up. Beyond that, have very much enjoyed your presentations tonight, and thank everybody for joining us. We'll be here for a couple more minutes, though we'll be on mute. But if there are any questions that come up, please, you can use the Zoom chat. You can use the comments on our Facebook Live feed to ask them. Anyone who is joining us on Zoom or anybody who is joining us on Facebook Live, we are at the tail end of our public meeting on our capital program of projects for fiscal year 23. If you have any questions at all, please put them into the comments window on Facebook Live or into the chat box here on Zoom. We'll also be posting this recording later this week on our YouTube channel. So for anybody who wasn't able to see the presentation, you'll have a second chance there. Any questions you have also at any point, info@rideandtarc.org or our customer care line, 585-1234. That's area code 502, of course. And with that, I think we're going to wrap it up here in just a couple of moments, though we'll keep it open for just a moment or two longer if any questions out there do come up. So we'll pause for just a moment here, go back on mute. Please, if you have any questions, you can put them in the Facebook Live comment window, in the Zoom chat window, and definitely appreciate everybody's participation tonight. All right, well, we appreciate everyone joining us tonight on Facebook Live and Zoom, and thank you very much to Jeffrey Hoban for giving 2 great presentations. We're going to wrap it up for this evening, but look forward to any questions that might come in later, and we'll be continuing to do some of these virtual public meetings to make sure there's more of a chance for folks who might not be able to make it out in person. I'll be able to log in for a little bit of time to understand more of the financial decisions and challenges happening at TARC, and giving you your opportunity for feedback, comments, and questions. So thank you again for everyone tonight, and we will break it off here.